The harbor was the most fortified base in the Pacific, yet it became a mass grave in a single afternoon. 60 ships, thousands of tons of steel, and a silence that has lasted 80 years. When divers first descended into the turquoise waters of Truk Lagoon, they didn't find a shipwreck. They found a city. A dead city, frozen in the exact moment of its expiration. But as they swam deeper, they realized something. The fleet wasn't just resting, it was still armed. And it was still waiting. It started with a ceramic coffee cup clinking against a saucer. The morning air in Truk Lagoon was humid, smelling of salt and diesel. For the sailors of the Imperial Japanese Navy, this was the center of the world. Truk was the Gibraltar of the Pacific, a natural fortress ringed by a protective coral reef that made it virtually impenetrable. To the sailors on deck, the lagoon felt like a sanctuary. They walked the gangplanks of destroyers and cruisers, believing the geography itself was their armor. The logistics were a marvel of military precision. Warehouses overflowing with aircraft parts, tons of ammunition, medical supplies meant to sustain an empire. This is where the logic of the Imperial Navy collapsed. They believed the reef was a wall. They forgot that walls only work if the enemy can't fly over them. The base was too successful. It had gathered too much value in one place, and in the eyes of the US Navy, that didn't make it a fortress. It made it a target. 100 tons of steel and arrogance, drifting in a paradise that was about to become a tomb. February 17, 1944. Operation Hailstone. The attack didn't begin with a warning. It began with a scream of engines. The first torpedo hit the hull of the Fujinami with a violence that defied physics. This is the moment the sanctuary died. When a ship sinks this fast, you don't experience it as a disaster. You experience it as a series of sensory failures. First, the floor vanishes. The deck tilts at an angle that makes standing impossible. Then comes the smell, a suffocating mixture of burnt electrical wiring and raw fuel oil. You don't gasp for air. You choke on a fog of steam and powdered paint. Inside the hull, the world becomes a puzzle you can no longer solve. You try to reach the hatch, but the steel has warped. The door that was supposed to save you is now a wall. Your thinking slows. The panic is replaced by a strange, cold clarity. You realize your hand is missing the railing. You realize the water is already at your waist. And it is freezing. But the most terrifying part wasn't the sinking. It was the fact that the ships didn't just go down. They plummeted. Many of them hit the lagoon floor with such force that they cratered the seabed. Men were trapped in air pockets, listening to the sound of their comrades screaming in the next compartment. They could hear the water rushing in, a relentless metallic roar. And then the roar stopped. Silence. Only the sound of bubbles and the slow, heavy weight of the Pacific pressing down on the hull. By the time the smoke cleared from the surface, the Gibraltar of the Pacific was gone. 60 ships had been erased from the map, but they hadn't vanished. They had just moved. For decades, the lagoon kept its secret. The water grew still. The coral began to reclaim the steel. Then, the divers arrived. Imagine descending into a void of turquoise, your flashlight cutting through the haze. And then, out of the dark, a bow emerges, massive, rusted. As the divers swam through the wrecks, they found things that shouldn't have survived. In the hold of a freighter, they found crates of medicine, still sealed in wax. 100 yards away, a stack of ammunition, perfectly preserved in the anaerobic cold of the deep. And then they found the people. Not bodies, skeletons, pinned under beams of steel. Some were still clutching their gear, others were simply there. It's the detail that stops you cold. A skeletal hand resting on a valve, a boot still laced. The intimacy of the death is what makes it unbearable. But this is where the story stops being a history lesson and starts being a threat. The divers realized that the Ghost Fleet wasn't empty. Tons of unexploded torpedoes and depth charges are still bolted to the decks. Some of the chemicals in the munitions are leaking, poisoning the very coral that tried to hide them. The wrecks are unstable. One wrong move, one shifting plate of rusted steel, and a pocket of trapped air or a dormant bomb could trigger. The lagoon is no longer a graveyard. It is a minefield, a submerged warehouse of death that refuses to degrade. The ocean didn't bury the fleet. It just kept them waiting.